hear me? Everyone can hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
you're good.
Okay. Well, good morning. Good morning, Santa Barbara. I'm honored to be with you again. I remember well the Sangha down there when I visited some time ago, and it's very nice to connect again with you. So thank you for inviting me to join you. We are hopefully coming out of a challenging year, and I thought we could talk together about basically about the simplicity and you could say the economy of this practice way. So this morning, let's begin typically with a Zen story. This, like most Zen stories, this is a conversation, and it's a conversation between Zhao, who's became a very famous teacher. There's many stories about Zhao, and Zhao was a younger monk at that time, and approached his teacher, Nanchuan. You may be familiar with the Japanese translations. It's Zhao in Japanese is Joshu, and Nanchuan is Nansen. So Zhao came to Nansen and he said, "What is the way?" Nanchuan said, "Ordinary mind is the way," or mind just as it is, or everyday mind. Ordinary mind is the way. Zhao said, "Shall I try for this? Shall I turn toward this?" Nanchuan said, "Well, if you do so, you'll be separated from it. You'll miss it." Zhao said, "How can I know the way unless I try for it?" Nanchuan said, "The way is not knowing, and it's not knowing. It's neither knowing nor not knowing. Find that place," Nanchuan said, "find that place that is neither knowing nor not knowing, that is neither trying nor not trying, and you will find vastness itself." For Zhao, this was a turning point. He realized something and continued his practice. We often think in our practice way of a goal or or at least a direction, a kind of or have an aspiration, or make an effort. And this teaching conveys to us a kind of a cautionary warning to not employ the kind of merchant's mind that sometimes arises in us, commonly arises in us. How to say this? A merchant's mind is a mind that arises in us, a kind of bargaining mind that says, if I do this, then I will get this. If I try to have an ordinary mind, an unfabricated mind, a natural mind, I'm going to try for that. And the nonsense says, no, don't try, but find that place that is neither trying nor not trying. Find that middle path that is neither trying nor not trying, and enter there. So this is how I'd like to approach a sense of how we can enjoy and meet this unfabricated, this unembellished, this ordinary, this just as it is kind of existence without the ideas and the conceptualization of putting on, you could say, extra clothing, putting on the embellishment of being something special, or being something unique, or being say, a Zen student. Just being yourself. In the early Sangha, the term for someone who was recognized or understood to have kind of negotiated the way, it was called an arhat. And an arhat was someone who put aside what was called the asravas. An asrava is a Sanskrit term that means it has some different translations, and an asrava sometimes gets translated as leaking. So an arhat, someone who has negotiated the way, has put aside leaking. He has stopped leaking. I think the other translations of an asrava is effluent, someone who's, there's even this connotation of, it's kind of like a sore that's leaking. It also it's someone who's an arhat has put aside the leaking of being anything, being on as an identity. It's called Bhav Asrava, the asrava of the leaking or the loss of energy or the diminishment of one's essential being has been diminished as you leak that. Put aside that the asrava, the bhav asrava of wanting to be something, wanting to be even be an arhat, be anything. It's gone. It stopped leaking of that. And put aside what's called dith asrava. And dith asrava is the leaking or the diminishment or the loss of energy that comes from having a view, having a fixed view, having conceptualized or reified the ungraspability of life. Tried to hold it with a view, with conceptual imputation. So there's I think Dan mentioned about a sangha who right before the first council, in a talk here a couple weeks ago, mentioned someone who had a sangha had finally, before the first council, had put aside this leaking. So this is kind of an understanding of how the early sangha understood the way. It was not accumulation. It was not acquiring specialness. It's not acquiring any special powers. It was releasing. It was letting go. It was dissolving. It was the arhats stopped their leaking. And I heard one teacher say about asravas that there's two kinds of this leaking that the asravas do. You can leak by like a bucket that has a leak in the bottom of it, and your energy, your vitality, your presence is diminished by kind of leaking out of the bottom. So we can imagine someone who's maybe lacks the confidence or energy to practice, would kind of leak out of or doesn't have the self-confidence to kind of meet this practice, would kind of leak out of the bottom of their practice. There's another kind of leaking in this. This teacher said it's kind of leaking over the top. You kind of flood your presence or your environment by being too full. So you leak over the top. You kind of flood your environment. Maybe you have a big idea. You're a very important person, and you've practiced a little while, and you think you're a big deal, and you flood your environment and leak over the top. So this is one, in the early Sangha, this was one understanding of the way was not accumulation, not acquiring special attributes of any kind, but letting things go, letting things dissolve, and then seeing what's left, what remains? And that's the question for us. We drop off with, as Dogen said, we drop off body and mind when we practice. We try to release our constant conceptual imputations and our fabrications of what we are and what the world is, and just sit with our body and mind when we practice. And of course, we notice in an internal dialogue sometimes, and our thoughts carry us away. That's kind of the momentum of our just what our minds do. But as we practice, as we continue to practice, we find that conceptual imputation, that fabrication, that you could say our mental creativity, our fashioning of the world starts to dissolve or get softer. In other words, we release, we let go. We stop leaking in this way, or we at least suspend the leaking of our existence. The early Sangha made a point of really simplifying their lives. So the early monks and nuns, those who decided to take on this practice wholeheartedly, you might say as a full-time job, they left the householder life. They left their ordinary life and chose to lead a radically simple life. So they just had no possessions. They had a robe and a bowl. They kept things very, very simple. And they just received food. They didn't even work. They focused entirely on meditation and practice. And so it was a kind of a radical simplicity. That simplicity, that outward simplicity was actually not the point. The point was that internally, within themselves, in their minds, in their internal work, that's essentially what they were simplifying. And the outward expression of just having a robe and a bowl, that was just the outward expression of what they were doing internally. They were making things simple and direct. They were taking things off. They were not acquiring things. It's even said that the monks that had practiced for a long time, they had bowls and they would receive food from the laity, and they would come to the laity's house and ask for an offering. And it said that the older monks who had practiced longer and had become more empty, become more simple, become more elemental, they received more food because their bowls appeared to be more empty. The younger monks who still had ideas and conceptualizations, they didn't get as much food because their bowls, same kind of bowls, but their bowls appeared to be, to the laity on some intuitive level, to be less empty. So they got less food. So this is kind of an understanding of how the early Sangha, you could say, was practiced a kind of deconstruction or a reductive sense rather than an accumulative sense. There's another term, interesting term, called avarana. And avarana means, this is a Sanskrit term also, and it means a veil or a covering or an obscuration. So this was in the early Sangha as well. So the monks and the nuns in practicing practiced releasing what's called kam asrava, and kam asrava means the veil or the obscuration due to desire or attachment or thirst. Or bhavasrava, it's just kind of this similar term to the avarana of becoming or identification. And these all have negative aspects too. So as well as putting aside the desire for becoming or identification or fabricating an identity or a self, sort of building a self. There's a negative aspect to the bhavasrava, which is the desire for negation, the desire to disappear, the desire to escape. So the early monks put aside bhavasrava, the obscuration of becoming or not becoming. They put aside both. They put aside the attachment and desire and thirst of kamasrava, or the negative part of that, which is aversion, hatred. They put aside the desire for it and then you could say the resistance toward it as well. And they put aside dith asrava, the desire to have a view or to have a fixed identification with a particular opinion or even a ritual or anything like that. They put aside that. They let that go. They released it. And even there's another one that's even more subtle. It's called a jiv asrava. And that's the veil of ignorance itself. In other words, the indulgence, you could say, of not wanting to know, but just avoiding knowing. The situation here is, as you can see, there's not an accumulation of any kind of attribute. As I said before, it's putting aside these things, letting this go, letting that go, letting the views go, letting these certain attachments going, letting these habits go. And then we can ask ourselves, we can inquire, okay, I put aside this attachment to this view. What's left? What remains? Or where am I now? And it may be more familiar to you. We have these three kleshas. The sometimes translated as greed, anger, and ignorance, or attachment, aversion, and delusion. The three poisons, or the three kleshas, they're called. Klesha means to stain. Something was pure, and it became stained. It became discolored. So we have that in Buddhism, and we also have something called the five hindrances, and what are they now? The five hindrances are sense desires, ill will, restlessness, and worry. And another one that I can relate to is called sloth and torpor. I love that one. And the fifth one is called doubt, or it's sometimes translated as hesitation or vacillation. So what's interesting, as you can see in early Buddhism, in foundational Buddhism, they're not talking about so much about any kind of special state or elevated state or transcendent experience. What early Buddhism or foundational Buddhism seems to be attending to is noticing what we need to release ourselves from, what we need to put away from, what we need to put away. And then whatever remains, having put away sloth and torpor, for instance, what remains? What remains for me? If I'm slothful, or torpor means sloth. Sloth means not even beginning. Torpor means kind of just loss of energy. Having put away those attributes, then I can say to myself, okay, Michael, I put away sloth and torpor. What remains? Well, maybe some energy, maybe a kind of relationship to the world that doesn't have that attribute. Having put aside these clinging, these attachments, these grasping to certain sensual desires, to say my desire for a certain kind of food, or a desire for recognition for another person, wanting the approval of another person. So I've examined that in myself, and I've looked at that asrava, or that klesha, or that hindrance, however we want to put it. I've looked at that, I've examined it, I've practiced with it, I've recognized it in myself, and I've released it. I let it go. I let it go by accepting myself. I've let it go by not giving it attention. What remains? What remains? What's left? Well, we could say a life without that clinging, a life that's liberated, that's released, that doesn't, that it's not, my life is not fabricated or embellished or contained by that attention or interest or obsession with wanting the approval of this other person. I'm liberated. I'm released from that. So the teaching of the teaching that we're receiving from this from the early Sangha is we do not have to ask ourselves what we can get from our practice, what special state we can arrive at, whether it's just to be more peaceful or to have special knowledge or to have a better relationship with things. We don't have to have a sense of trying to acquire that. This is understanding from this early teachings is we don't necessarily have to move toward a specific goal like that. We can actually relax from that acquisition mentality, that merchant's mind of trying to acquire a special state. What we can do is let go of these, let go and simplify our practice by releasing ourselves from these kleshas, from these hindrances. So Xiaozhou, Xiaozhou just, he was a young monk and he wanted to get something. And he asked his monk, he asked his teacher, he asked this Nansen, hey, shall I try for that? Shall I try for this unfabricated mind, this pure mind? And Nansen said, don't try. Don't try to know it. Find that place that's neither knowing nor not knowing and enter there. So the question comes up for us. We sit in meditation. This is our work. This is our activity. We do something very, very simple. We just sit down. We find we kind of make an intentional situation where we sit down and we're very quiet and we're very still, and we meet our body and mind just as it is. And we notice that within our body and mind, there arises whatever arises in our body and mind. We try and meet without embellishment, as simply as possible, and to put aside these kleshas and see what remains, see what's left. And we could say, what's left is nothing special. It's just our life. It's just our life as it is. It's not a transcendental state, or maybe it is a transcendental state, but it need not be a transcendental state. It could just be It could just be a cup of coffee. It could be washing the dishes. It could be, as Nansen said, it could be ordinary mind. It could be everyday mind. What is the way? Zhaozhou said, and Nansen said, your ordinary mind, your mind just as it is, unfabricated. That's the way.